Download the free Book Lovers Trail Te Arakai Puka Puka audio app and start your literary journey along State Highway 2, from Wellington through the Wairarapa and into the Hawke's Bay, one bookshop at a time. Download the app now from the Apple Store, Google Play Store or the web app. More info at www.booktown.org.nz.
Thank you so much for coming along to this morning's conversation. I'm so excited to be here. It's wonderful to see such a full room, and also to see some blokes that have very bravely come along. It's fantastic, because these conversations are important to us all.
3 cheers for the blokes in the audience.
So we're here to celebrate Ruth's new book, Three Wee Bookshops at the End of the World. Also just want to acknowledge a few special folks in the audience, and that is Ruth's husband, Lance, the lovely Lance, Ruth's sister, Jill, and Ruth's son, Andrew. So it's very special to have you here. So since Ruth was interviewed on RNZ by Kim Hill back in 2020, Ruth, a bookseller, author and environmentalist, and so much more, has become a real national treasure. And people now trek to Menopore to go and meet Ruth and lovely Lance. I first came across, Ruth's name first came into the Shepherdess world when our designer had read your book and came back and said to us, we must do a story with Ruth. And there's a story on Ruth in the summer 23-24 edition, there's a few copies floating around there on the chairs a couple of years ago. And then since then we've had the pleasure of crossing paths a few times. And every time I have a conversation with Ruth, I leave feeling, having these little gems of wisdoms, which I'm sure you'll all feel today. So, yeah, really excited about this, and slightly daunted, but but we'll have fun with it, won't we? So today, the format for the chat is going to be Ruth and I having a bit of a conversation, just like a chat amongst friends, and then after that, open to the floor to questions, and please encourage you to ask any questions you wish. And wanted to say that whilst we will be talking about prolapse, this session is not just about prolapse, and I'm sure we'll be going down other journeys and paths over the course of the conversation. So likewise, feel free to ask questions on other things too. So like her first books, Three Wee Bookshops is a deeply honest, funny, it's moving, it's about Ruth's life, connection, survival, and it touches on and goes into topics that often in society we don't talk about. And Ruth, in this new book, you speak about, we've named this the session Design a Vagina, which speaks to an issue that's really close to your heart. Do you want to start by telling us what does Design a Vagina mean? Where did that name come from?
Well, the very first thing I want to say is that if anybody has bought scissors and paper and colouring and pencils, we are definitely not doing a workshop on making vaginas. And I know you might all laugh about that, but it's come up twice. And it absolutely floored me. I said, no, we're only talking about it. But I'm really, really happy to see some men here, because for those of you that have had a prolapse or went through an operation for a prolapse, having the support of your partner is so important during that period. The name Design a Vagina came to me when Lance was driving me home after having my prolapse operation, and I said, this really needs to be talked about. And this little baby here is one of the reasons why so many women have a prolapse, because we're having bigger and bigger babies. But also it's because farming women do a lot of lifting and things like that. And I wanted to write about it because nobody talks about it. And I feel it's like what happened with menopause, that not very many women spoke about menopause. I don't know how our grandmothers and great-grandmothers went through all of this. And then what happened with me getting a prolapse, it actually turned into a very, very funny story. And for those of you who haven't read my book, it's only one chapter, but it was the chapter I really wanted to be in the book. It was a series of very funny events, and I could have taken it as, oh my God, I've got a prolapse, I've got to have an operation, how terrible. But in actual fact, what happened was it was all very funny. And I'll just briefly tell you, and if anybody here likes carrots, I suggest you leave now. Because what happened was when my prolapse happened, having had menopause, I didn't have any Tampax in the house, and I had to get to the medical centre, which is 20 kilometres away, and so I had to find something to hold my prolapse in place while I was driving that 20 kilometres. So I looked around the house, hobbled around the house with this great, huge, bloody thing between my legs, and the only thing I could find was a carrot that could be possibly helpful. Anybody that wants to leave, you're most welcome to leave at any time. So I cut the top off the carrot and the pointy bit, and then I washed it and wrapped it in Glad wrap and put Vaseline on it. And so that's how I drove to the doctors. And it's not advisable, it's very uncomfortable. And when I got to the doctors, I had a female doctor. I asked specifically for a female doctor. And I put a plastic bag in my handbag so that when I got the carrot out, I had somewhere to put it. So she said to me, just hop behind the curtain, Ruth, and, just take your knickers off and we'll have a look at what's happening. So I get there and the blasted carrot had worked its way up. And I was thinking, oh my God, I've got to ask the doctor to pull a bloody carrot out. But anyway, thankfully, after fishing around, I managed to get this carrot out and put it in the bag. And as soon as the carrot came out, my prolapse came out. And the doctor comes in and says, hop up on the bed. Oh, there it is. And I thought, yeah, well, that's why I'm here. And she said, oh my gosh. And anyway, so that was just the start of this very, very funny process and I was thinking, how do other women cope like this? They're out on farms, they've got a long way to drive, and if they haven't had their menopause, well then yes, they'll have tampons to help them. But then I thought, how can you talk about this? And then Lance was away at sea at the time, and that's why he couldn't drive me to the doctor. But the specialist, I had a beautiful little Indian woman, Mrs. Nahar, tiny as anything, and her index finger was smaller than my little finger. She was absolutely exquisite. Anyway, she said, when Lance comes home from sea, I want to see him, and then we'll go through the process of the operation, and everything will be fine. So Lance comes home, and I say, we've got to go and see this gynaecologist. So we're sitting there, and she says, well, we're going to operate within the next couple of days, blah, blah, blah. And I had a ring holding it up, and I'm sure there's some woman here with rings in. And then she looked at Lance, and she said, Lance, small, medium or large? Now, isn't that just incredible? I could not believe this was happening. And it went through my mind, I thought this is a Hollywood moment, where you're going to have some kind of facelift or something, but instead of that you're having a vaginal lift. And I thought, poor Lance. So if any guys here have to go through this, this is the answer. And I thought, if he says small, then I'll think, oh my God, the poor love. And if he says big, I'll think, oh God, really? And he was sitting there thinking, and then he just said very quietly, status quo. So that's the answer when you get asked that question. But anyway, so it just kind of went on from there, and I just thought it was all very, very hilarious. And I thought, I've got to write about it, and I have got to get women to talk about prolapses, because it's just another medical thing. So, as I mentioned before, Dr. Nahar's got these really beautiful, exquisite little hands. And after 6 weeks, you go back and they make sure that you're intact and you can start having sexual intercourse again. And she put her rubber gloves on and she inserted her little finger into me. And she said, "Can you feel that, Ruth?" And I said, well, actually, Lance is a bit bigger than that. There was no way I was going to feel this tiny little thing that was smaller than a tampon. Anyway, so it's all in the book. And I just really want women to start being open about it. So I spoke to a female doctor in Dunedin, Anna, and I had written the first draft of this Designer Vagina chapter. And I said, "How do you feel about this? Do you think this is a good idea?" And she said, "It's absolutely brilliant. It's time people talked about it." And she said, if you need any help or any advice. I said, well, the main thing is that I'm not a medical person. I'm just saying this from a person who has experienced it. And I really suggest very strongly, if you have a prolapse, or you can feel it when it starts, get onto it and just be ready for the ride. It's great.
Yeah, and that's, any of this discussion is just us sharing our experiences, or, don't try this at home, as you, we're not suggesting that, absolutely seek medical advice as you need. So, Ruth, tell us how did you even know where to go for help? I think that's often a challenge, especially with the women's health space, of knowing, because sometimes the GP doesn't know where to send you, No. So how did you... Yeah.
Well, in Tiana, we've got an exceptionally good medical centre, and we've got, I think, 9 doctors now. But at that time, we had 1 female doctor and we had 3 male doctors. So I went to see the female doctor. And I did that because this is something else funny that happened. Poor men. I was going through my menopause and I was crying a lot for no reason. I was having those terrible sweats and I had a very, very itchy vagina. And I went to the doctor and I said to him, I've got all these things. And he said, "Oh, it's all right, Ruth, it's only a change of life." But he didn't do anything about it. So I rang this female doctor in Invercargill, and she was older than me. And I told her, and she said, "Oh, love, you've started your menopause." And I said, "Oh, great." And she said, "So what you do is you go and buy a baby bath and you fill it up with warm salted water and sit in it for a couple of hours, or an hour or so." And so that's what I did. And the itching went away. And she also put me onto an Indian herb. It is called cohash, which then meant I didn't have to take the hormone tablets, which was great. And I was fine. After that, I went through menopause really, really well. Now, without me going to that female doctor, the male doctor just said, "Oh, it's change your life, go home and work through it." So I think that if any woman has got anything that's happening that's just a little bit unusual, find a female doctor. There's some brilliant female doctors around, and they will really understand what you're going through. And I think it's also very important that you take your husband so that he understands what you're going through as well.
And you mentioned in your book about the doctor that you went to, saying about the common, how common they are, prolapses, especially talking about the Southland
Yes.
farming community. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what she shared there?
My specialist, Mrs. Nahar, said that it was very, very common in Otago and Southland. In fact, Otago and Southland have the highest proportion of women with prolapses in New Zealand. Well, they did back then. And she said it was because it's a farming community and women are always doing heavy lifting, and also we're having bigger babies. But she said that farming women, because they see prolapses in sheep and cows, they're inclined to just say, oh yes, and get a ring or something and not really have it looked at, just live with it. I think, this is also a farming community, and I really, really suggest that if you've got the start of a prolapse, get onto it now. And if you have an operation, it is not a big deal. It really isn't. And just make sure that the surgeon that you've got really knows about how to fix a prolapse. You'll all know about what's happened with some of the women that have had prolapses mended, and it hasn't been nice.
So Willoughby's my third baby, the one that was floating around that Stephen might have taken out. It was the first sort of 6 weeks after having her. And I'm thinking, I don't think something's quite right down there. Sort of something felt like it was, different. And I said to my partner, who's a dairy farmer, so he sees prolapses all the time. So I said to him, I think something's not quite right. Can you please have a look? And he's like, bloody hell no, go to the doctor. Anyway, and then once I went to the pelvic floor physio and established, she said, okay, you've got a mild prolapse. Then, sitting on the couch there one day, and he's, sorry, is this too much? He was sitting on the couch there and in his Stony Creek shorts and doesn't often wear underwear. And everything's hanging out. Not the prettiest of sights, may I say. It's not always that pretty. And I was like, oh gosh. And he says, oh, you've got stuff hanging out, I've got stuff hanging out, we're all hanging out, But I think, that he didn't seem fazed. The pelvic floor physio said to me, blokes don't really care. They're too much, really. Like, it's, we can work ourselves up and feel that it's a problem, but actually, it's, yeah. But in saying that, you've got to do what's right for your health. And I just think, Ruth, one thing you're amazing at is, bringing a sense of humour to really big, situations or to serious things. And I think that's a real gift you have, and you do that throughout all different themes in the book. Do you want to talk a bit about, has that helped you yourself process things? Because, it's, yeah.
I always like to think that I can see the funny side of everything, but that doesn't mean to say that I'm in a good space all the time. If you've read my first book, you would have read where I tried to commit suicide and ended up in a psychiatric ward. And in my latest book, I go down that hole again, and I end up with really bad depression. And very luckily I had Lance, and he took me to the mental ward in Invercargill, and I had time there under suicide watch. So I've touched also in my book about depression, and it's interesting. You can see somebody and you think what a great life they have, but I'm sure every one of us has gone through a time when we think we can't pick ourselves up anymore. So I've written about depression. I've also written about addiction. And Lance, he's a non-smoker now, but for years and years he was a smoker. And so he was addicted to smoking, and my grandson was addicted to pee. And I got permission from my grandson to write about his journey, because he came and lived with us, and Lance and I and my grandson worked through it, and he's now been clean for a number of years. So I've touched on other subjects that are hard to write about. I've also, of course, put the bookshop stories in there about people that come to the bookshop, because so many lovely people come to the bookshop. Yeah.
And I mean, what is it like putting all that out there? Because you have been incredibly frank. Is there some positives that have come from that you felt come back to you from sort of being incredibly brave? Because I'm sure what you're saying is helping so many women that are reading your book, and men, and feeling much less alone when they can read a story that resonates or that they can relate to. Not many people are as brave as you to do that, in their writing. So, yeah, but there also must be challenges to doing that.
Of course. When I'm writing, I put beside me my readers, because you can write a book, you can have the book edited and published, and then nobody's going to read it. And it's only the readers that finish that journey. And so when I'm writing, I think about the person I'm writing about. So if I'm writing about my son or my grandson, I'm thinking about them. But I'm also thinking about every one of you that is a reader. And so I'll write something, and I write in a way that I'm talking to you. And after I've written something, I read it very quickly and I say, now, you're going to be happy with that? And I think it's so important that I'm not writing for myself. I enjoy the process of writing, but I really want to reach out to people, and it's sometimes very hard. But all of us have been through hard times, and what's the consequences of my first book was that so many people were touched, to the point where I've got Joshua's, it's just a wooden cross up at the Tiana Cemetery, and he was the little boy I lost. And he is not in the main part of the cemetery, but he's over by a fence underneath a tree, so he's actually quite hard to find. But after my first book came out, not very long after, a woman came to the bookshop and said, I've just gone up and found Joshua's grave, and I put flowers on it. And I knew I was going to start crying, so I said, excuse me, and I ran inside, and I told Lance what had happened, and I said, I didn't want that to happen. I didn't want someone to go up and find his cross, and I don't know why I felt like that. And Lance said, well, think about the woman. She might have lost a baby. There's a reason why she found Joshua's grave. So I got myself together and I went out, and it's happened 4 or 5 times that a woman has gone up, found Joshua's cross and put flowers on it. And just a little thing like that, then that you have touched somebody, and you hopefully have helped them through a hard time.
So where does your courage come from, do you think? You've got this incredible courage that you've applied across so many parts of your life. Is it, are there childhood memories, or, you talk a lot about your dad in the book and things that you've learned from your dad, or I don't know.
You see, I don't see myself as courageous. I see myself as sometimes, I've always been a risk taker. And I just feel that if you're going to live a life, it has to be a life of honesty. And if you're going to write, and you're going to write your story, it has to be a story of honesty, and it's no good covering up, that you've had some really dark, bad times, but you've also had some really brilliant times. I don't see myself as courageous. I see myself as very, very lucky, because I should have died when I tried to commit suicide and I didn't. I could have easily been lost at sea a couple of times. I've taken incredible risks, and I've been very lucky that I'm still here. So when I write, I don't class myself as above anybody. I think everybody here could write a story that somebody would like to read.
Yeah, everybody has a story to tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Would it be okay if I ask you a bit about Lance, because Lance comes up in the books, and you also talked earlier about with prolapse and how this is it affects the partnership, the relationship, or having both, taking your partner along to the appointment. So at the heart of your first book is the love story between you and Lance, and in your usual style, you're very upfront about the reality of that. I guess, but I have huge admiration as I read both your books for your incredible love story. Do you want to share that with a bit of that with the audience? But also, what are the gems? Because I think anyone in a long-term relationship, we're always, there's highs and there's lows, and what have you learned about that over the time?
Well, I'm definitely not a marriage counsellor. So Lance is sitting in the front here, and when we eventually got married, we got engaged when I was 21, and that fell apart. And then about 11 years ago, we got married. We had been living together for about 20 years. And both of us weren't sure if our relationship was strong enough to survive long term. But when Lance left the sea and he was home all the time, we found actually that we could live together. And what was interesting, and I say this because I see a lot of women here my age, is that if you're with a man for a long time, your love changes. It's not that really beautiful, exciting blossoming of love and keeping you awake at night and wanting to be with them all the time. It develops, and I'm sure a lot of you have a relationship that has developed to where you love the person. When you see them, your heart beats a little bit faster. And they'll do something nice for you, and you think, thank God I'm with that person. And I think what has made our relationship strong is that we're very honest with each other. And Lance is extremely generous with me. He'll say, somebody said to him, do you ever say no to Ruth? And he said, yes, but it doesn't work. So...
I think a question I'm interested in is how have you and Lance learned to communicate what you need from each other? Or, how do you, sometimes I think that blokes can be in their own world and are on, look at the world differently to us, which I guess that they do. But what strikes me, or certainly from your books comes through, is this beautiful partnership. And I don't know, do you have any, I know you said you're not a counsellor, but any advice?
I think, and I'll go back to what I said, I think it's an honesty. I'm going to tell you just a very quick little story about how Lance copes with me and makes my life easier. And also, it goes the other way too, because he sometimes annoys me. It's not all happy families, but we just have to give each other space, and we understand that, and also letting them have their independence. But we bought, after about 2 years of looking at electric cars, we bought a Tesla. And I hated it. I'm only just now starting to like it. And our first long trip was from Manapuri to Christchurch. And we filled up in Milton, and I had range anxiety the whole time. We get to Timaru, and we are down to about 5 kilometres, and there is a Tesla charging station. And thank goodness we were there. We tried to plug in, and none of them were working. Lance rang the number up, and the person that spoke, I think she might have been Indian, he couldn't understand her. So he gave me the phone, and I said, we're at the Tesla charging station on such and such street. And it was a guy, that's right. And the guy said, no, you're not. You're at the supermarket charging station. I said, no, we're not. And he said, madam, you're at the... I said, no, we're not. We're at the Tesla. And I was getting really cross. And I said, and none of them are working. And I said, so what do you do from here? We're down to about 2 kilometres. And I was really stressed. And he said, well, you'll have to ring AA. And I thought, here you have a car, you're at the Tesla station, and they say you have to ring AA. And he said, and by the way, madam, have you got a Tesla? And I said, of course I've got a bloody Tesla. And I hung up. So then Lance said, well, we might have just enough to get to the grocery, the supermarket, where there was a charger, and we got there with 1 kilometre left. And I was furious, and I said, I need a coffee. And the only place for a coffee was McDonald's, and I never go to McDonald's. And I said, that would be bloody right. And Lance, in all this time, was just getting on with charging the car and being lovely and quiet and gentle and calm. And I was racing around like a maniac. Anyway, we fill the car up and away we go. And Lance turns to me and says, Ruth, will you be easier to love tomorrow? So I think I've got to put a lot of the success of our relationship down to Lance's personality.
Oh, that's gorgeous. So just interested, in the book you talk about towards the end about being called an old lady by a child that comes into the shop, and you take that in your stride. If we're thinking about aging and what that looks like, body, mind, and you talk about turning 79, or by the time the book comes out being 79. So yeah, tell us a bit about what does this life stage, what are the opportunities, or what's exciting about this stage of life?
About being 79?
Yeah.
Well, I've promised Lance I'm going to retire when I'm 80, which is next June, not the June coming, but next June I'll be 80. And I really can't see myself retiring as such, but there'll be just a change of lifestyle. I don't know, I just feel that I hear people say, I'm really worried about retiring. And I've written a little bit about that because it's such an awful word. It sounds like you are going to be tired for the rest of your life. And it's going to happen over and over and over again. So I firmly believe that retirement can be extremely special and rewarding. You have the time and the energy to still do things. And I've got heaps and heaps and heaps of things I really still want to do. And I think that when people say how old you are, and you say 79, it sounds really old. And I know that to young ones it sounds really, really, really old, because once you're 30, to a child you're old. I think it's a mindset that all of you here have a much younger head than your body. Your body's falling apart, everything's sagging and wrinkly and everything, but your brain still tells you you can do things, and I think you just have to trust your brain and go with it and do as much as you can with the body you've got.
Absolutely. Are there any other sort of reflections you want to share with us, or do you want to read a little passage from the book, or?
I don't know.
What time are we up to? I'm sorry. Oh, 20. Oh, awesome.
Oh, good. Well, I could read... I know what I'll read. And I haven't told Lance I'm going to read this. I'm hoping that some of you have read my first book so that you'll know that Lance is husband number 4. And for those of you who haven't read my first book, Lance is husband number 4. So it's page 205. So after Lance and I had got back together, we were living together for quite a while before he asked me to marry him. And of course I said yes. And we decided that we would get married close to his birthday so we wouldn't forget it, because we both forget things very easily. But what happened was, a week before the wedding, Lance's health plummeted. He was rushed to hospital and placed in isolation. His white blood cell count was 0. "If you don't want me to get married, just tell me," he said. He smiled and assured me that he did want to get married, and he was really sick. I moved down to Invercargill, staying with our friend, so I could be with him. I hung our wedding invitation on the door to his hospital room, desperately hoping we would still make the day. Then Lance's specialist suggested that it might be best if we got married in Lance's isolation ward, admitting only the celebrant and a nurse as our witness. We would all have to wear hospital gowns and face masks. "Okay, we can do that," I said. It wasn't a dream wedding for sure, but needs must. I raced into town to inform the Register of Marriages that we were changing the wedding location from Mount Titiroa to Kew Hospital. Paperwork completed, I returned to the hospital. Lance said we had just organised a party after the wedding, nothing special, that the party was to go ahead in his absence, as family and friends were coming from Christchurch to Dunedin and Wellington. So it was organised then that we were going to get married in the isolation ward. Didn't have to worry about what I was going to wear because we're all going to be in white gowns. Thursday lunchtime, we were getting married on the Friday. Thursday lunchtime, the day before the wedding, Edith and I, my friend, were sitting in the cafe when the phone rang. "Hello, Ruth, I'm ringing up with an update on Lance." It was his specialist. His white blood cells are recovering. "That is wonderful. Does this mean that he's on the mend?" "Yes, a big improvement. How would you like to take him home tomorrow afternoon and get married in Manapori?" You can understand, this is, 14 hours before we were going to get married. "Yes, you can pick him up around about 3, take him home for the wedding, then bring him back to hospital. Will that work for you?" Would it work for us? Yes. How fabulous. Better get things organised, he said. Edith and I couldn't believe it. Lance and I were going to now get married at the hotel in Manapori. So first I had to go to the register. I went straight to the office to change the location again. The woman who had been grumpy the first time was now not happy at all. "This is the last time you can change the venue, as time is running out." I said, "Yes, I know." She handed me the revised paperwork. I was then off to Hallenstein's to buy Lance a shirt and new jeans as he had lost so much weight and none of his clothes fitted him. And then it's just about how the dear man, I found a man that could take Lance's trousers up because they were too long and he did it for nothing. But then, yes, after hours. So then everything. My sister Jill organised the wedding and the flowers and everything at the hotel, and then Lance was allowed to come home. So Lance says, "Guess what, Bunny?" as he said as he hugged me. "I'm allowed to stay home for the weekend. I seem to be getting better all the time." That was the best wedding present. We would be spending our first night together as Mr. and Mrs. Shaw. I stood and watched him undress for his bath. As he unzipped his trousers, he looked at me and said, "I have another surprise for you. Hope you like it." So as a woman, you think, well, maybe. He dropped his trousers and I saw a urine bag attached to his thigh. He had a catheter. "Not the greatest thing to have on your wedding night, love," he said. I laughed. It really didn't matter. Everything was ready and all we had to do was get dressed.
Thank you so much for sharing, Ruth.
We have to thank Lance for that.
Yeah. Well, it's a whole family, obviously willingness or, to put this into a book and, to put it out there really.
Well, I did ask Lance, and he said that was fine, that it went in, and it was also fine. I talked about the prolapse. So I think the wedding was a very, very special time, and it was funny because after you have a prolapse operation, and you're allowed to resume having sexual intercourse, you get prescribed an ointment. And I said to Mrs. Nahar, "What's the ointment for?" And she said, "Well, you'll be a little bit tender down there and this will just anaesthetise it and it will help you when you're having sexual intercourse." So we're driving home from Invercargill to Manapuri with this tube of ointment. And I said to Lance, "If it anaesthetises me, well, then it's got to anaesthetise you." And so how does it work? But you do. It does. It works.
Oh, thank you for sharing. I'm glad that we, got to make lighthearted of these situations, don't you? Laugh or you cry sometimes. On that note, but doesn't necessarily have to be on that theme, are there any questions from the floor for Ruth?
Oh, yes. Lance, that's where he lived. And like many women, we go to where our man lives. Yeah. And initially I didn't like it. I didn't like Manapuri, and Manapuri didn't like me. And I've written about that in the book as well. But now I don't think I'd live anywhere else. But of course, if Lance left, I'd have to go with him. Yes. No, I have always written. I was so bad at mathematics at school that my mathematics teacher in high school, his name was Bill Hill, and he used to put me in the corner at the back of the room and give me paper and a pen and say, "Today, Ruth, I want you to write about something rather," because he knew I was so hopeless at maths. And so I used to just write stories all the time. I've always kept diaries, so I've just always written. Yeah. Beg pardon? Oh, well, that's in the book. He said to me one time that I was to write about the day I was born. And I thought that's a really strange thing because none of us can remember that. But anyway, I did write about it, and I said that I couldn't remember there being a band or anything, and that it was all pretty bland. And then he's another subject he gave me. He said, "I want you to write about a telegraph pole." And Naseby then had wooden telegraph poles. And so I wrote my first story about trees, that this telegraph pole had to be a tree in a forest that had been cut down and put on a corner. And I suddenly realised that the sacrifice of a living thing so we could have a telegraph pole. And that was the start of my journey with my love of trees.
Thank you. Are there any other?
Yes.
You've had such a tremendous life and you helped so many people. I was curious if you could choose what your legacy would be.
Oh. I've never thought about that. What do you think it's going to be, love? I don't know. I think I would like... I've never been afraid to put my name to anything, and I've always been as truthful as possible, and I've never steered away from conflict.
Basically, you're never going to do your legacy because by the time you've got the final chapter, you'll be dead.
Oh, that's really nice. I don't know. I'm not going to have a funeral. I'm going to have a party, and I don't want people to stand around and talk about me or cry or anything. I just want to have a party where everybody's going to be happy, and I don't even want them... I don't know. I really don't.
I imagine that your book has touched people, that so many more people than you'll ever, and in ways that you don't even know. Like you've had obviously some people that come and share with you their experiences or sort of reflections from the book, but there'll be so many others that have taken great hope from it. But
Well, I'm pleased to say that there's men also have turned up at the bookshops, and I've said that in so many ways, that my stories have helped them. I think when I was first approached to write my first book, I said to Jenny, the publisher, there's been so many books written about sexual abuse, mental abuse, loss of a child, divorce, all those things, and so why would another book be any different? And Jenny said to me, well, I've been a publisher for 20 years and I know when it's a good story, so I just want you to write it. I think I was overwhelmed when it started selling overseas. It's now in 14 languages. And even more overwhelmed when people started coming to the bookshop and taking photographs of the bookshop, which is great, but also knowing they've got a space where they can share things with me. So we have a big box of tissues in the bookshop now because there's lots of tears. There's also lots of laughter, and we have big buses pull up with people carrying their books in German or Italian or Dutch to be signed. And it has really blown me away that my book has made such an impact on people. But one of the things that happened was a young girl was standing out on the footpath. And I went over and I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yes." And she said, "I've just got out of jail. I sent a free copy to the 2 women's prisons in New Zealand and the 40 women's refuges." And she said, "I read your book when I was in jail, and when Mum come to take me home, Mum said to me, 'What do you want to do?' And she said, 'I want to go to Memoir and meet Ruth, because if I had have read her book before I went to jail, I would never have gone to jail.'" And so she had just got out of jail, and her dear mum had driven her to Memoir. And what do? You just have to hug them and hold them and think, well, thank God that she's now realised she can do something with her life.
Beautiful. Are there any other questions for Ruth? Oh, lots.
Yes.
I really enjoyed in your books when you have the bookshop segments and you suggest books to people. I always get a little thrill when I've read a book that you suggested. How do you choose? What makes you pick what books to give to offer to people?
I've written about that in the next book. I don't know what it is, but when people come in and say, "Can you suggest a book for me?" I usually just have a little chat with them, and I think, "Oh, I know, they'll enjoy that book." There's, I don't know what it is, but I seem to always pick the right book, and I've written about 2 books in there that really blew me away when I gave them to people. But one of the stories I haven't put in there is that after we had the massive floods in Fiordland about 3 years ago, and the Hollyford track was washed out, and also Guns Camp. And there was 4 guys that worked for the Department of Conservation that were sent in there to clear the track and to secure the bridge. So one day one of the guys turns up at the bookshop and he said, "Ruth, we're not very good readers, but we've got nothing to do at night because they're in the middle of nowhere. And we thought we would start reading books, and we're going to read a chapter each night." And he said, "So can you suggest a book for us?" And I was thinking in my head, here's 4 young guys working very hard all day, coming home, cooking tea, and then sitting around and somebody reading them a chapter of a book. So it's got to be a very, very good, entertaining book. So for those of you who have read the short history of tractors in the Ukraine, you'll know why I chose that book. So I said, "Yes, here's a really good book. You know, you're going to enjoy this." And it's got some sexual innuendos about this old man and this very, very horny young Ukrainian woman. But it's also got little snippets about the development of Ukraine through the use of tractors. So I thought this was the perfect book for them. But anyway, so away he goes, and about 2 weeks later he comes back with the book and he said, "Ruth," and I thought, "Oh, this is going to be interesting. Have you got another book like this?"
Probably got time for one more question. Anna, how are you?
Yes, you start at the beginning. So you read The Bookseller at the End of the World, and then this one here, that one, is on sale now. It was launched about 3 weeks ago, and this is Three Wee Bookshops at the End of the World. And so the first one is to my age of 35, and this one is to the age of 79.
On that note, thank you so much, Ruth, for the honest conversation. I really admire you hugely, and how you continue. You bring like that courage and that truth to everything that you do. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing this morning, but also for the gift of the books, because they're incredible stories. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, love. Thank you.